Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Bai Xiaochun was visibly stunned. He might have taken Bai Xiaochun's words to be mere ravings, except for the fact that his divine sense was actually connecting to the sovereign's arm. That connection seemed completely and utterly inconceivable. He's just a celestial. He's not even an Archaean. And yet he's actually connecting to that sovereign's arm. He almost couldn't believe his eyes. Despite the fact that he had sensed the sovereign's aura influencing Bai Xiaochun's cultivation over the years, he still couldn't wrap his mind around what was happening. What secret is he hiding? Could it have something to do with the fact that he's from the eternal immortal domains? Maybe Bai Xiaochun's eyes went even wider than they had been before. He hadn't thought much of the eternal immortal domains, but as of this moment, he couldn't help but recall a legend that his previous master had spoken of. Even as the spirit automaton stood there shaken, Bai Xiaochun's divine sense connected fully to the sovereign's arm, and he began to pour his thoughts into it. What had previously been only a vague outline of the arm now became clearer, and he began to absorb it into his mind. It was very similar to the way that he had meditated on the face of the beast statue in the Spirit Stream sect all those years ago. Time began to pass. 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Before long, 10 years had passed. During that decade, Bai Xiaochun didn't move. He was completely immersed in his pursuit of enlightenment. Although he hadn't fused with the sovereign's arm completely, his understanding of it was becoming drastically more complete. Eventually, Bai Xiaochun emerged from his trance, and when he did, his eyes shone with light that struck Bai Xiaochun down to his very soul. As of this moment, Bai Xiaochun was emanating an aura that Bai Xiaochun could not possibly mistake for anything else, weak as it was. The aura of a sovereign, he said with a gasp. Ignoring Bai Xiaochun's shock, Bai Xiaochun slowly rose to his feet and looked down at his right arm. His eyes glittered with the light of augury for a long moment, and then he clenched his hand into a fist. As he did, an enormous, shadowy emperor appeared behind him, clad in imperial robes and wearing an imperial crown. As for his facial features, they were an exact match for Bai Xiaochun's. The undying emperor's fist. However, this emperor was different from the emperors that had appeared in the past. His right arm did not match the rest of his body. It looked exactly like the sovereign's wolf-like arm. Everything down to the bones, the flesh, and the blood were all exactly like the sovereign's, and it radiated a sovereign aura that made it seem vastly more powerful than before. It was an aura that could shake celestials and Archaeans alike. This was what Bai Xiaochun had gained after 10 years of meditation. He had incorporated the sovereign's arm into his undying emperor's fist, fusing the two together. Clenching his hand into a fist, he punched out into the air. Instantly, the sovereign aura erupted, filling the void with dazzling light, and sending a massive tempest of wind out across the damaged fan. Any celestial or Archaean who saw this would be shaken to the core. The fan itself trembled, and Bai Xiaochun's eyes bulged on the verge of popping out of his skull. He actually did it. Bai Xiaochun looked down at his new right arm, and softly said, "From now on, my undying emperor's fist is going to be called the Undying Sovereign's Fist. It combines the power of my sutra of former reincarnation and my sutra of present life and death. It will be a trump card that I can use to fight Archaeans." Eyes flickering with determination, he flew off of the sovereign's arm and back to the Taoist Tower of Life and Death. There, he sent his divine sense out, anticipation burning in his heart. Zhou Zimo and Song Junwan were still asleep. However, much of the color had been restored to their faces, indicating that much of their life essence had been restored. Bruiser was similarly recovering well. As for Song Ke, he looked exactly the same as he had before, prompting a light sigh from Bai Xiaochun. At this point, his eyes flickered with cold light as he waved his hand, producing a faintly glimmering soul from his bag of holding. It was the vile prince's soul, which had long since lost self-awareness, and didn't even have the power to struggle against Bai Xiaochun as he held it. How could I possibly allow you to die a quick death? All of his time up to this point had been focused on reaching the late celestial realm and creating his undying sovereign's fist. Up to now, he hadn't had any spare time to deal with the vile prince. You like switching bodies, right? And puppets? Eyes shining with merciless anger, he waved his hand, causing an array of materials to fly out from the damaged fan, which he rapidly transformed into a puppet to put the vile prince's soul in. At that point, the vile prince regained some of his self-awareness, and after realizing that he was now trapped in a puppet body, looked up in terror at Bai Xiaochun. How dare you do this to me, Bai Xiaochun? My father the emperor will never let you get away with it. He's definitely going to find you. Your father the emperor? HMPH. The emperor is no longer your father. But don't worry, I'm still your enemy. Performing an incantation gesture with his right hand, he forced the puppet form vile prince to dance wildly in front of the huge tower, just as the prince's puppets had been forced to do back in the imperial palace. Those puppets had lost their lives to perform that dance, and the vile prince had lost his soul to perform his. As he danced wildly, his terror mounted. After all, the wildness of his dance was causing his soul to slowly disperse. Clearly, he was being killed in the same way that he had tormented his own victims. That's bullcrap, he suddenly blurted. What do you mean the emperor isn't my father? Bai Xiaochun simply snorted coldly and started walking away. He would let the vile prince dance his way into death, as his soul dispersed. You like dancing, don't you? He said over his shoulder. Dance away. No, this can't be happening. Let me go, Bai Xiaochun. I won't ever bother you again, I promise. I guarantee it. Unfortunately for him, his pleas fell on deaf ears. Bai Xiaochun's hatred for him simply ran too deep. And thus, the vile prince danced madly for 9 days. At that point, the puppet body continued to dance, but his soul was almost completely faded away. He almost had no self-awareness left. On the 10th day, he danced into death, and his soul dispersed. At that point, the materials which had made up his puppet body stopped moving, and then collapsed onto the ground. Bai Xiaochun watched from a distance, with Bai Xiaoqi standing at his side, more terrified than ever. Death cannot wipe out your crimes, Bai Xiaochun said through gritted teeth, his hatred still festering in his heart. Finally, he stood up and went over to collect the materials that had once made up the puppet body. Even as he did, Bai Xiaoqi's face suddenly flickered dramatically, and he flew up off the surface of the fan to look out into the void. Rumbling fluctuations rose up which caused the damaged fan to tremble, and suddenly change directions of its own volition. The other half of the fan. Bai Xiaoqi shouted excitedly. The other half. Jaw-dropping, Bai Xiaochun left the fan face and appeared on one of the ribs. Looking out into the void, he saw a glowing light off in the distance, rushing toward them at high speed. A closer look would reveal that within that glowing light was half of a damaged fan. It was exactly the same type of light that glowed from Bai Xiaochun's part of the damaged fan, although slightly dimmer. Furthermore, this fan was so damaged that it looked like it might collapse at any moment. It's finally here, my lord, Bai Xiaoqi said excitedly. If you help me, then together, we should be able to put both halves of the fan together. Then it will become a true sovereign-level precious treasure. He had been looking forward to this day for a long time, and in fact, had often thought that it would never come, and that the two halves of the fan would forever follow their own trajectories through the void. But then that sovereign's arm appeared, with an aura that could actually power the damaged fan to a certain extent. Under Bai Xiaoqi's direction, the fan had slowly changed course to head toward its other half. And now, the two halves were about to meet. Bai Xiaochun was also excited, although not as much as Bai Xiaoqi. He stood there calmly at the edge of his damaged fan, looking at the other half approaching. Will the other half have another spirit automaton? He asked. Bai Xiaoqi hesitated for a moment, as though he hadn't considered the possibility. Then he looked at Bai Xiaochun and confidently said, if it does, then I'll definitely crush him. Bai Xiaochun didn't reply. Keeping his cultivation base rotating, he thought about what it would be like to have a complete fan. It was an exciting thought. Soon, the other half of the fan was close enough that Bai Xiaoqi performed a double-handed incantation gesture, causing bright light to erupt from the half of the fan that was under his control and spread out toward the other half. However, as the two halves of the fan got close to each other, a vicious howl erupted from the other half, and a huge figure appeared. It looked like a larger version of Bai Xiaoqi, except vicious, with green skin like an evil ghost. It was with madness and greed that this strange version of Bai Xiaoqi looked over at them. Bai Xiaochun's pupils constricted, and Bai Xiaoqi gasped loudly. There is another spirit automaton, he exclaimed. Bai Xiaochun's eyes narrowed. Now that he was in the late celestial realm, he was a lot more confident than he had been in the past. Snorting coldly, he stepped off of his damaged fan and appeared within the beam of light that Bai Xiaoqi had sent streaming off of it. The enormous spirit automaton was immediately on guard, and even lunged at Bai Xiaochun with outstretched hands. Screw the hell off, Bai Xiaochun barked, waving his sleeve and sending the power of his cultivation base shooting out. As soon as the giant spirit automaton was struck, it howled in anguish and began to back up. What had injured it was not Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base power, but rather, the sovereign aura he now had. Although most cultivators would not understand what it was, the gigantic spirit automaton was very sensitive to that type of aura. Eyes swimming with terror, it continued to back up. Meanwhile, Bai Xiaochun performed a double-handed incantation gesture and then reached out toward the other half of the fan. Rumbling sounds echoed out as the two fans rushed toward each other and began to merge together. The giant spirit automaton howled in terror and rage, but Bai Xiaochun simply looked over his shoulder and quietly said, "Didn't you say you planned to crush him, little automaton?" Although Bai Xiaochi had initially been a bit frightened by the way Bai Xiaochun leapt to the attack, his eyes now began to shine brightly. Flying toward the huge spirit automaton, he shouted, "I'm the real spirit automaton, fool. Who cares if you're extra big? You're mine." The two spirit automatons roared as they began to fight viciously. That was something that Bai Xiaochun couldn't assist with, so he simply sat down cross-legged and sent his divine sense out to speed up the process of the two halves of the fan combining with each other. Slowly but surely, the fan was becoming whole. Bright light shone as the two spirit automatons fought, until eventually, Bai Xiaochi won, and consumed the larger automaton. Bai Xiaochi looked larger and oddly disproportionate as he flew unstably back to Bai Xiaochun. A happy look on his face, he burped, then sank down into the fan face, where he disappeared. As he left, Bai Xiaochun scanned the fan with divine sense to make sure that Bai Xiaochi wasn't hurt. Before long, the two halves of the fan had combined to create one whole fan. There were some areas that were still damaged and cracked, but considering how the fan was capable of repairing itself, Bai Xiaochun was fairly certain that it wouldn't take long for it to be back to its original state. Now that the fan was complete, it was larger than before, and also shone with much brighter light. It looked completely spectacular as it continued to sail through the void. Even more exciting was that his level of authority over the fan had actually increased. With a mere thought, he could change the direction the fan was traveling in, and also its speed. He could even make it stop if he wanted to. That was something he had not been able to do in the past. However, he could also tell that the fan was following a preset trajectory. And after sending some divine sense into the fan, he realized that somewhere far off in the distance, something was calling to the fan. Now that the fan was whole, that calling had begun to pull the fan toward it, causing it to fly in one specific direction. What called out to the fan after it became whole, he thought. Could it be? His heart began to pound. Could the call be coming from the sovereign from the immortal world, the one who created the Tao essence of life and death, and also the fan? It didn't seem likely to Bai Xiaochun, considering that the sovereign had supposedly perished. At this point, he realized that although he could make minor adjustments to the fan's direction, he couldn't change its overall course. Finally, he decided that he would ask Bai Xiaochi some more questions when he woke up. Now that the fan was whole, the greatest change to it was the world in the fan's face. Before, that world had contained a river, a mountain, a tower, and a boat with two men playing Go. There was also a palace floating in the river, and the arm of a sovereign hovering in the air. But now, the river was complete, and contained something new. A black fish. Its eyes shone with strange light, and although it wasn't moving, Bai Xiaochun could sense the fluctuations of a sovereign coming off of it. There was something about the aura that made him think of the Tao essence of life and death, and seemed to be connected to the Taoist Tower of Life and Death. After closer inspection, Bai Xiaochun was certain that the black fish contained the fan's true sovereign-level divine ability. Before, the damaged part of the fan that he had become the owner of had the Taoist Tower of Life and Death, but had lacked the black fish. And the half of the fan that the fish had existed in lacked the Taoist Tower of Life and Death. But now that the fan was whole, its sovereign-level divine ability was complete. Excited, he performed a few tests, only to find that the current level of his cultivation base didn't permit him to actually use that special magic. Not willing to give up so easily, he performed some more tests, only to find that he was unable to do anything with the mountain, the river, or the boat. However, the palace was different. It had been so severely damaged that, despite the fact that it contained a portion of an Archaean soul, it wouldn't actually be dangerous to an Archaean in a fight. Frustrated, Bai Xiaochun sent his divine sense onto the boat. To his shock, one of the old men playing Go suddenly shivered, and the Go piece in his hand began to shine with bright light and emit powerful fluctuations. As the Go piece vibrated, Bai Xiaochun's eyes began to shine as he realized that, apparently, all it took was a thought on his part to control the Go piece. Maybe it's not just the Go piece. Holding his breath, he sent his divine sense into the Go board as a whole, which also began to shine with bright light. However, only a moment later, the light faded, and his divine sense began to dissolve. Can't quite get the Go board, he thought, sighing regretfully. Pulling his divine sense back, he sat down cross-legged and performed some breathing exercises until he was fully recovered. Then he stood up and sent his divine sense out again. Instead of targeting the Go board, though, he locked onto the Go piece. As it began to vibrate and emit bright light, he performed an incantation gesture with his right hand and then waved his finger through the air. The go piece became a bright streak of light that shot out of the fan face and into the void. The energy on display far surpassed that of a celestial, and was more like that of an Archaean expert. The fan itself trembled, and the startled Bai Xiaochun waved his finger in the direction of the sovereign's arm. When the light hit the arm, a spectacular boom echoed out, and the arm was shoved backward several meters. At the same time, a hole appeared in it, the same size as the go piece. It only dug about 3 inches into the surface of the arm, but it caused the flesh to begin to decay for a moment before the fan's powers of regeneration kicked in and healed the wound. Even still, Bai Xiaochun was shocked by the ferocity of the attack. So strong. He was excited, but at the same time, didn't want to injure the arm any further, and therefore didn't dare to use it to do any more tests. Next, he used his authority over the fan to cause it to stop moving, and then he flew off of it into the void. There, he performed an incantation gesture, calling upon his connection to the fan to send a bright stream of light shooting out from it. The light pierced through the void until it reached a certain spot, where it exploded. Vibrations rolled out through the void, invisible, but detectable by Bai Xiaochun. Considering that he was now in the late celestial realm, and had already fought with an Archaean once, he could tell exactly what those fluctuations indicated, an Archaean-level attack. It even seemed stronger than when the vile emperor attacked me. I wonder how long it would take for the light from that go piece to reach the eternal immortal domains if I summoned it. And I wonder how many times I could do it. After some more thought, he went further out into the void to do some tests and see how quickly the light could reach him. What he found was that as soon as he summoned it, it would appear in front of him, almost as if it were completely ignoring the space between the two of them. Eyes widening, he changed locations and did a few more tests. Afterward, he was convinced that it didn't matter where he was, the light would come to him immediately. Now this is what I call a weapon, he said, throwing his head back and laughing uproariously. He continued to perform more tests. After 15, it reached the point where no light came. At that point, he realized that 15 times in a row was the limit. I wonder if that means I can use it 15 times every day. 15 times per day would be more than enough. Savoring this development, he returned to the fan, sending it along its way through the void as he sat down cross-legged to meditate. The next day, he excitedly performed some more tests. However, it was to his shock that he got no response from the go piece. All of a sudden, he started to get a bit nervous. No way, don't tell me that you can only use it 15 times total. The thought instantly caused him to want to moan in grief. Starting to obsess at the thought of what he might have lost out on, he waited for more time to pass. For an entire month, all of his tests met with failure. By now, he was feeling profound regret for what he had done. The thought of having wasted 15 Archaean-level attacks made him wish he could smack himself silly. Why did I have to go and waste them? He said, frowning and sighing in defiance. An entire year passed. Finally, he decided to perform another test, whereupon bright light suddenly began to shine from the go piece. Apparently, after using all of the light, it would take a full year to recharge. Shooting to his feet, he began to laugh loudly. From now on I'm going to call the light from that go piece Archaean luminescence. Swishing his sleeve, he reveled in the sensation of having another trump card at his disposal. Once Wanner and Zemo are awake, I'll go back to the eternal immortal domains. High-spirited and full of mettle, he looked back at the tower. Based on his calculations, there was only a year to go before Song Junwan and Zhou Zemo awoke. Bruiser would likely awaken along with them. Sadly, there didn't seem to be any change in Song Ke. It was at around this time that Bai Xiaochun woke up. Clearly, his divine sense was much stronger than before. After scanning the fan with it, he proudly materialized in front of Bai Xiaochun. Hey there, little Xiaochun. I have some issues with you being the new owner of this fan, and would like. Before he could say anything further, Bai Xiaochun looked at him out of the corner of his eye and then unleashed a beam of Archaean luminescence on him. The light instantly struck fear into the heart of Bai Xiaochun, who shivered and dodged to the side. When he looked back at Bai Xiaochun, all sense of arrogance was gone from him, and he looked like the picture of subservience. What did you just say? Bai Xiaochun asked coolly, standing there with his hands clasped behind his back. Heart pounding with fear, Bai Xiaochun said, I just said that I think you're the most suitable person in all creation to own this legacy fan, my lord. Never could he have imagined that, while he slept, Bai Xiaochun would gain control over the go piece all on his own. I have an idea, Bai Xiaochun said, looking back at him. Let's talk about that name change you wanted. I've come up with the perfect name. Bai Xiaochun immediately began to wail inwardly with grief. Terrified of what name the vengeful Bai Xiaochun would give him, he quickly said, "My lord, after absorbing that large spirit automaton, many more powers have been awakened within me. Although I can't yet get those Archaean slaves from the boat to leave the fan, I can summon them to you to be sparring partners. That way, you can get used to fighting with Archaeans. And then, when you get back to the eternal immortal domains, you'll definitely dominate anyone who tries to fight you." Worried that Bai Xiaochun might not believe him, or might not give him a chance to follow through on his offer, he performed an incantation gesture and threw all of the divine sense he could muster toward the fan face. Instantly, one of the two Archaean slaves shivered, and his eyes began to glow. Rising to his feet, he blurred into motion, flying up into the air within the world of the fan face. Clasping hands, he bowed deeply in Bai Xiaochun's direction. "Greetings, master." Although Bai Xiaochun had hoped to take the Archaean slaves with him, and was disappointed that he couldn't, it would also be good to do some training with them. When Bai Xiaochi saw how his eyes were shining brightly, he breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. "My lord," he continued obsequiously, "the exalted sovereign captured these Archaean slaves and sealed them with restrictive spells. Only a sovereign could possibly undo them." Ignoring Bai Xiaochun entered the world of the fan face. "Come on, let's fight." Even as the words left his mouth, he attacked. The old man slowly began to look up. He wore green garments, and didn't seem very impressive at all with his white hair and emaciated frame. He was even a bit hunched over. But after looking up at Bai Xiaochun, he straightened, and his eyes began to shine even more brightly. Suddenly, his facial features began to change, and an expression of anger filled his face. As his energy began to build, his hair changed, transforming from white to pitch black. By the time he finished looking up, he didn't look like an old man anymore, but rather, middle-aged. Even as his energy soared, the divine sense and cultivation-based fluctuations of the Archaean realm erupted out from him, as well as a unique, holy air. Although the man now seemed to be on the same level as the Vile Emperor or the Saint Emperor, he was a bit off in terms of his cognitive ability and overall strength. And yet, even a slightly weakened Archaean was still an Archaean. Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but shiver in fear. All of a sudden, he felt like he was facing a chaotic, primeval beast, something whose mere gaze caused all of his hair to stand on end. However, it was actually an exciting sensation. He wanted to learn from this Archaean, and to do so in a safe fashion. There could be no better and safer sparring partner than this old man. Shouting at the top of his lungs, he powered up as well, his energy rapidly reaching that of the late celestial realm. He also drew on his fleshly body power as he prepared to fight. As a result, although his aura couldn't quite match up to the Archaeans, his overall energy was close. They looked at each other for a moment, causing rumbling sounds to echo out between them. Then, in the blink of an eye, they both blurred into motion, slamming into each other and causing deafening booms to fill the air. Frightened, Bai Xiaochi quickly performed a double-handed incantation gesture, sealing the entire area off. Then, he backed up to watch, his expression that of concern, but his true feelings anything but that. "Who gave you the right to bully me, Bai Xiaochun? HMMMPHH. Did you really think the grand spirit automaton of this fan would be looking out for you? Yeah, right, I just want to see you get beat up." Although he didn't dare to give voice to such thoughts, his eyes glittered as he observed the fighting from a distance. Booms rang out for about 7 or 8 breaths of time. At that point, blood sprayed out of Bai Xiaochun's mouth as he staggered backward several hundred meters before finally forcing himself to a stop. As for the Archaean, he simply hovered in place, clasping hands and bowing in Bai Xiaochun's direction. "Archaeans really are pretty incredible," Bai Xiaochun murmured, his eyes glittering thoughtfully. He didn't even use any big divine abilities, only ordinary magical techniques and fleshly body power. But even that was enough to force me back. I can only stay in the fight for a few breaths of time. My biggest advantage isn't being in the late celestial realm, it's having the powers of regeneration from the undying live forever technique. As his injuries healed, he charged into battle once again, using all of his fleshly body power and divine abilities to see what he could do against this Archaean. Living Mountain Incantation. Cloud Lightning Forefather Transformation. Mountain Shaking Bash. Undying Hex. Throat Crushing Grasp. Live Forever Lamp. Sutra of Past Reincarnation. Sutra of Present Life and Death. In one interchange after another, he used all of the magics he had learned through the years, with the exception of his Undying Sovereign's Fist and the Water Swamp Kingdom. Thanks to this constant fighting, Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base remained in the late celestial realm, but his battle prowess advanced by leaps and bounds. He constantly mixed up the way he used his divine abilities and magical techniques. And thanks to his powers of regeneration, he could fight over and over again, and find his own weaknesses and limitations. Days passed in which Bai Xiaochun was completely wrapped up in his training with the Archaean slave. At one point, he asked Bai Xiaochi about the fan's overall trajectory, but unfortunately, didn't get much solid information. Bai Xiaochun also found time to work on the third level of his time immemorial codex. Unfortunately, that required a lot of time, as well as a peaceful and calm heart. At the moment, he was too worried about Song Junwan, Zhou Zimo and Bruiser, as well as all of the people from the Heavenspan realm. After some failures with the Enlightenment, he focused completely on sparring with the Archaean slave. As his battle prowess increased, the Archaean slave slowly began to resort to more complex and powerful magical techniques, and also began to draw on more of his fleshly body power. Bai Xiaochun lost every single time, but was making rapid, almost unbelievable progress. In the beginning, he could only last against the Archaean slave's simplest magical techniques for 7 or 8 breaths of time. But now, even after the Archaean had begun using powerful divine abilities, he could last for longer and longer. As for Bai Xiaochi, despite the fact that he already knew a lot about Bai Xiaochun, he was completely stunned by what was happening. This guy is pretty awesome. Another few months went by, and it reached the point where Bai Xiaochun could fight the Archaean slave for the time it takes half an incense stick to burn. He was now fully comfortable in the late celestial realm, and had reached new understandings of his own magical techniques. Finally, he demanded that the Archaean slave fight even harder. A boom could be heard as Bai Xiaochun was sent tumbling backward 100 paces. He was gasping for breath as his wounds began to recover, and yet, the battle spirit in his eyes shone brightly. "Use your highest level of battle prowess," he said. The Archaean's eyes glittered as he blurred into motion, becoming a wild tempest that caused the entire damaged fan to shudder. Startled, Bai Xiaochi strengthened the sealing marks he had put in place. As for Bai Xiaochun, his eyes shone with madness in the face of the destructive tempest of power that was the Archaean slave. The time has finally come to see if my undying sovereign's fist can shake a trump card ability from an Archaean. Shouting at the top of his lungs, he clenched his hand into a fist, causing cracking sounds to ring out in all directions. A huge wind sprang up, and within his celestial aura, a scrap of sovereign aura appeared. The Archaean slave shivered and braced himself. At the same time, an enormous figure appeared in the air behind Bai Xiaochun. The shadowy emperor looked like he always had, except for his right arm. Undying sovereign's fist. Bai Xiaochun shouted, lunging forward, his fist seemingly wreathed in flames as it struck toward the Archaean slave. As the fist shot forward, the shadowy emperor's sovereign arm seemed to fuse with Bai Xiaochun, making it seem like he was a sovereign unleashing a fist strike. For the first time, the Archaean slave let out a shout of fear. Not daring to hold anything back, he unleashed all of the energy he could muster, throwing out his hands to cause countless streams of golden light to shoot out from him. The light instantly transformed into a golden face, which howled as it lunged toward Bai Xiaochun's incoming fist. In what was only the shortest of moments, Bai Xiaochun's undying sovereign's fist slammed into the Archaean slave's deadliest move. A huge shockwave spread out through the world of the fan face, accompanied by intense rumbling sounds. The entire fan actually trembled. Bai Xiaochi let out a shriek of terror, and did everything he could to force the magical seals he had put in place to hold tight. At the same time, blood oozed out of the corners of the Archaean slave's mouth, and he staggered backward several steps. Bai Xiaochun also staggered backward, coughing up blood. A few hundred meters away, he lurched to a halt, his eyes shining with excitement and delight. "I can hurt an Archaean." At this point, he threw his head back and laughed uproariously. His fist strike truly could hurt an Archaean. Although he had ended up hurt in the process as well, with the powers of regeneration of his undying live forever technique, that was something he could deal with. Well, in this case, if I use my Archaean luminescence, then what reason do I have to worry about the vile emperor? Bai Xiaochun was absolutely confident about what was to come. Over the course of the following month, he continued to spar with the Archaean slave, becoming more familiar with the use of the undying sovereign's fist, and even making it more powerful. Other than the Water Swamp Kingdom, this was his most powerful divine ability, something that could shake even Archaeans. From the look of it, his bad luck was going to be a thing of the past. The undying sovereign's fist could crush anything in its path, and would soon cause Bai Xiaochun to bask in the warm glow of good luck. Eventually, at long last, Bruiser woke up. When it happened, Bai Xiaochun could sense the Taoist Tower of Life and Death tremble a bit. Blurring into motion, he headed to the tower, sent some divine sense inside, and then performed an incantation gesture. A black stream of light flew out from the tower, swirling through the air until it sensed Bai Xiaochun's aura, whereupon it shot toward him. Bai Xiaochun did nothing to avoid the beam of light. In fact, he smiled, stepped toward it, and threw his arms wide. As the black beam neared, it resolved into the shape of Bruiser. He was clearly excited and happy, and immediately pounced on Bai Xiaochun, yipping a bit and licking him all over the face. Bai Xiaochun laughed in delight, hugging Bruiser, who had assumed an appropriate form for the occasion. He looked mostly the same as before, although he was about as tall as an average person and sturdily built. Especially noteworthy was that his cultivation base was now in the demigod realm. Combined with his impressive frame, his demigod aura was enough to leave anyone shaken who saw him. Then there were the black flames which roiled out beneath his feet, and his razor-sharp teeth. He looked quite vicious and intimidating. However, in Bai Xiaochun's eyes, he was the same little Bruiser from back in the Heavenspan realm. "Bruiser," he exclaimed. Bruiser howled in response, rolling around excitedly on the ground and occasionally leaping high up into the air. Anyone from the Spirit Stream sect who saw Bruiser acting like this would be visibly shocked. After Bai Xiaochun had left the sect all those years ago, Bruiser had always acted particularly domineering and vicious. He had fiercely protected the sect under any and all circumstances, and many new disciples were actually scared of him. But now, he was acting just like he had when he was young. In fact, he even shrank down to the size of a hand, then bit down onto Bai Xiaochun's pant leg and began to drag him along. Bai Xiaochun couldn't have been happier. "Come on, Bruiser. Dad's going to take you for a walk. This is going to be our home from now on." Bursting with delight, Bai Xiaochun took Bruiser on a tour of the fan, starting with the world in the fan face. Bruiser was very curious about everything, and was very thorough in examining the place. Eventually, they returned to the Taoist Tower of Life and Death, which was when he suddenly spun in place and pounced on a certain area off to the side. As he did, a shriek rang out, and Bai Xiaochun stumbled out of thin air. Pointing at Bruiser in shock, he said, "That thing can see me?" Similarly surprised, Bai Xiaochun said, "Bruiser, meet Bai Xiaochun. You keep an eye on this fellow, he's not very trustworthy." Bai Xiaochun was very pleased with how spectacular Bruiser was for being able to see Bai Xiaochun. As for Bai Xiaochun, he immediately shrieked, "Hey, you said I could change my name." Bai Xiaochun roared with laughter, then made a few teasing comments. Then he led Bruiser off for another walk, when suddenly, fluctuations began to roll out of the Taoist Tower of Life and Death. Not just one set of fluctuations. 4. Bai Xiaochun immediately recognized two of them. They belonged to Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo. The other two were also familiar. After all the years that had passed, Bai Xiaochun had come to recognize the auras of his unborn children. They're gonna give birth now. Stunned, Bai Xiaochun sent some divine sense into the Taoist Tower of Life and Death, simultaneously rushing back toward the door. As he approached, the door opened, and Song Junwan and Zhou Zimo appeared, looking somewhat confused, holding their bellies as they walked out into the open. Upon catching sight of Bai Xiaochun, their jaws dropped. "Xiaochun? Bai Xiaochun." At this point, Bai Xiaochun could see that they were not about to give birth. Rather, the unborn children inside of them were simply moving around actively now that they were awake. Although he was relieved, he was also starting to feel a bit guilty and awkward. To be facing two women, both of whom bore his unborn children, left him feeling somewhat unsure of what to say. Blinking a few times, he said, "Hey there, how are you two? How the hell do you think?" Song Junwan snapped, stepping forward as if she intended to attack him. She had always had a short temper, and although there were tears in her eyes, she couldn't help but think back to all the bitterness she had endured over the years, and how long she had been pregnant. Zhou Zimo, the mistress red dust of the past, also had a sizable temper. And it was only made worse by the unclear relationship between her and Bai Xiaochun, and the fact that she had been pregnant for years now. Then there were all of the life or death situations she had faced. As of this moment, she was glaring daggers, and even began to walk forward as if to start fighting. Bai Xiaochun had never thought about what would happen in his moment. In the past, he might have fought back, but now they were his Taoist partners, both of whom were pregnant. How could he possibly dare to strike them? And they obviously wouldn't let him off the hook if he tried to escape. Whatever. If they want to beat me up, then so be it. Nobody's here to watch anyway. With that, he raised his hands high into the air in defeat. Then, the fists and feet began to rain down on him, provoking occasional yelps of pain. Before long, it was to his delight that he realized his celestial cultivation base allowed him to sense what the two women were thinking. When he was sure that their anger had been sated, he reached out, grabbed the two of them, and flew to the top of the mountain in the fan face, where he had long since hewn out an immortal's cave. Get your hands off me. Song Junwan said, glaring. How impudent of you, Bai Xiaochun. Zhou Zimo said icily. Both of you shut the hell up. Bai Xiaochun said. Before either of them could respond, he took them into the immortals' cave. Off in the distance, Bruiser looked on solemnly. Bai Xiaochi stood next to him, looking curious. Hey bro, Bai Xiaochi said, what do you think they're doing in there? Why were they fighting just now? And how come my master couldn't beat them? He's in the late celestial realm. Bruiser looked disdainfully out of the corner of his eye at Bai Xiaochi. He almost couldn't stand to be in the presence of someone who was obviously such a simpleton. Even after not being able to beat them in a fight, he then took them into his immortals' cave? Are they going to practice some cultivation or something? Bai Xiaochi scratched his head curiously. I think I need to go see for myself. His curiosity was especially piqued by the odd sounds he could hear coming from the immortals' cave. Even as he took a step forward to go investigate, Bruiser blocked his path. However, Bai Xiaochi was simply too curious, and considering his powers within the fan, there was no way that Bruiser could actually stop him. Passing Bruiser by, he entered the immortals' cave. Bruiser looked on, shaking his head. Before long, a howl of rage could be heard from Bai Xiaochun, accompanied by a yelp from Bai Xiaochi as he was ejected from the immortals' cave. I was trying to help you, my lord. I can't believe you actually attacked me. Shut up. Bai Xiaochun shot back, clearly flustered. After all, Bai Xiaochi's sudden intrusion into his immortals' cave had been quite startling. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.